Oh, I can't wait to go to senior staff meeting this week. I meet with the senior staff every week. We talk about what's going on, and I haven't been to Sanctuary in a while, so you can leave it there. If I need it, I'll come over. So I can't wait to go tell the other guys, the other senior staff, about this bad word games, right? And if you notice, there were a lot of four-letter words up there, right? Rose, T-Rex, cash. So I know it's been a while, but it's like things have changed since I used to come to Sanctuary. Let me tell you, when you're doing that kind of stuff. I am actually glad to be here. I've been at Black Rock for 22 years, so probably that's longer than some of you have been alive. And so I feel a little bit old. I also have a 29-year-old and a 27-year-old child, 29-year-old daughter, 27-year-old son. So again, it's really fun for me to come talk to you, except whenever I talk to my kids, they're like, Dad, don't preach. So I'm going to get to preach to you and not get in trouble for it. Yeah, so it's kind of, this is a treat for me to be here. I'm also thrilled because I'm vaccinated and I can lose this thing. I am so happy, right? Because those of us who like to talk, this really, this really hinders us, let me tell you. So to be able to talk to you and see your smiles, see some of your yawns probably a little bit later, it at least gives me some feedback of that if we're connecting or not. So great to be here. Thank you for that introduction. I totally appreciate that, Andres. I like when I can kind of hang out around with him because he lowers our median age quite a bit, and I appreciate that. I am one of the old guys on staff now. That's hard to deal with. When you think you kind of come in and you think you're like, a mover and a shaker or, kind of a change agent. And then you realize 22 years later, you're the old guy. You are the old, stodgy, old school traditional guy. So that's tough to deal with. I'm still kind of, still trying to learn how to deal with that and not be depressed. You know what I'm saying? So anyhow, so here's the deal. I want to talk a little bit about this last year because all of us have become all too familiar with new protocols, new practices, social protocols from this pandemic year. These are the new rules concerning social interaction and safety. You're very familiar. In fact, that's why I pulled out the mask. If you remember, just a little over a year ago, probably 15 months ago, these protocols, these practices that we all have employed for the last over a year, they were odd and strange and foreign for most of us most of the time. They certainly were out of the ordinary. They were not the norm. But this COVID environment, it established some new protocols that you and I abided by, that we kind of accepted, and they were now the established behavior so that we could remain safe, so that we could remain social. These practices, in fact, they've been so widely accepted and adhered to that they no longer seem strange. They no longer seem out of place or odd, right? They have become part of who we are, and probably some of them, at least some of the time, will remain. So let me talk to you about some of the new protocols. You'll recognize all of them, of course, but I want to just remind you of kind of these new practices that were really foreign just a little over a year ago. One was wearing a mask. I don't know about you. I remember I used to fly a little bit, not a whole lot, but when I would see someone in the airport with a mask, it was kind of odd. It was a little weird. I go, okay, they safety conscious, something going on there with their, with their breathing or whatever, but it was not common. Maybe 1 out of 100 people wore a mask when you were, and I never saw it anywhere else. It was only in an airport, and it was usually when it was international. It was always at JFK. I didn't see much at LaGuardia or Bradley or Westchester Airport. But when you're going international, there were some internationals that had this custom of wearing a mask before we adopted it in this COVID environment. Here's another one. Social distancing. Didn't even know the term, right, until this last year. Whether it's 3 feet if you're a child or an elementary school student, or 6 feet, which most of us abided by for the last year, right? Social distancing, we gave people space because we were trying to give them this safe proximity so we wouldn't infect them, they wouldn't infect us. That was new, right? Who knew that the whole social distancing would actually be established? And most of us abided by it for a good year or so. No contact greetings. Man, I was taught when I was a kid, you look, an adult in the eye, you shook their hand firmly. No, handshakes are out, right? Handshakes are out. The latest now is what? It's either the fist bump or the elbow touch or the air hug or maybe just like a head nod, right? In fact, most of it is you get your social distance, you give a little head nod, and that's like socially acceptable. If I had done that when I was young, my dad would be like, what are you doing? It's like you're supposed to, right? You greet someone, you make contact with someone. No more. It's changed in the last year. Zoom meetings. Yeah, we're all sick of Zoom, right? I mean, it's like, oh my gosh, we're zoomed out, now, right? But it has replaced almost all in-person gatherings. And the truth is, like I have a son who's working. He doesn't have to go back to the office anymore. He does everything on Zoom. Maybe you too. Here's another one. Previously, you would have been offended when you leave this room. We're going to hose down your seat. We're going to spray down your seat because you brought in some germs that we are going to disinfect when you leave here. If we had done that before a year ago, you'd be like, you would take offense. Like, hey, not me. We hired a guy on staff. In fact, he comes to Sanctuary. His main job for the last year is basically putting on a backpack. He looks like a Ghostbuster, right? And he comes in here and he wands every place you've been. Wherever you put your can or put your hand, we sanitize it. So we sanitize everything. It's not just hand washing anymore. It's you sanitize anything that you may have touched. It's the new norm. It's the new protocol. It's socially acceptable. You're no longer offended when we come in and sanitize. In fact, you hope they do. You want your seat sanitized before when the group before you was in here. It's what we've adopted. It's how we've changed. Social protocols change over time. And I just want to remind you that all these things were a little bit weird. They were a little bit odd. They were a little bit uncommon a little over a year ago. But now they're accepted, understood, and expected behaviors. And social protocols are not only reserved and relegated to, health considerations. There are protocols for many different social situations, several. In fact, there are social protocols for hosting a dinner party. That is when we used to do dinner parties. Do you remember those? Remember we used to do dinner parties? We used to have a cafe open or you'd have a barbecue. I mean, I don't know if anybody's doing a barbecue tomorrow. Probably the weather might not accommodate you, but the truth is it's like a lot of people, I talked to them this morning, they're not going anywhere. They're not having anybody over. They might try to grill out, but it's going to be just the family. But there are protocols for hosting a dinner party. I want to talk to you about a few of them. In fact, you know most of them. In fact, it's common sense to most of you. Even if you've never hosted a dinner party in your life, you probably know these protocols. These dinner party rules are so common that you'll understand them when I mention them. For example, if you're hosting a dinner party, protocol is, if you're the host, you greet each guest at the front door. You meet them. You are the first person they see. When they ring the doorbell, they expect to see you. You are the one to greet them and be there. And formally give them a handshake. Now you give them the elbow touch, right? It's a dinner party hosting protocol that's understood. There's others too. It's common sense, actually. After you've greeted your guest at the door, if you are hosting a dinner party, the next thing you do is you would take the person's hat or coat or gloves or whatever they need to kind of store. You as the host would take whatever they needed to put away. You'd take it, you'd hang it in a closet somewhere, throw it over a spare bed. You do something with it. You take responsibility for their property while they're at your dinner party. While they're in your home, you assume responsibility for whatever they need to kind of ditch so they can enjoy the party. That's what you do as a host of a dinner party. Next thing you do as a host, again, you know all these, after greeting your guest, after taking care of whatever need they have, what you normally would do is you would take your guest and you'd walk them to someone who's already there at the party. You'd make the connection with someone who's already there, right? You're trying to integrate them into the flow of the party. If there's no one there yet, or if everyone's kind of chatting it up and busy, you walk them straight to the coffee pot or the punch bowl so they can get something in their hand, so they can feel comfortable and welcome. That's what you do as a host. These are simple, common sense rules. They are protocols. if you're hosting a dinner party. Now, again, I don't know if many of you host dinner parties, but you do those three things, you're halfway home. They're understood by all of us. They are widely accepted. Now, I tell you these protocols not because, I'm a stickler for the rules, and not that I'm a big dinner party host, guru. I tell you them because I want to look at a passage from the Bible that has some dinner party protocols that might be unfamiliar to you. And if you don't know them, you won't understand the action that's going on. So I wanted to kind of make a connection so that we'll look at some of the protocols of a first century dinner party host, one that Jesus would attend, so you'd understand the protocols, the practices that were widely accepted and widely practiced, and then you'll understand some of the drama, some of the action that takes place at this real life event, this party that Jesus attended. So let me do that. Let me give you, before we jump into the passage, I want to give you 3, maybe 4, dinner party rules for first century Middle Easterners. And then we'll take a look at our passage. First one is this, protocol or rule number 1. The host of a first century dinner party in Jesus' day greeted every guest at the door, exactly like we do today. We've adopted that very same practice. Much like our practice today, if you were the host, you made sure you were the person to greet your guest, your invited guest, at the door. The only difference is, Middle Eastern culture, much like some European culture, is you greeted your guests with a kiss. Now, not a wet, sloppy, on the lips kiss, right? This is one of those kind of European kisses where you kind of, you give them a peck on either side, or maybe just move your head side to side. The idea is you are acknowledging them as your guest, and you're greeting them. It's the way you welcome them. If you're a dinner party guest, you meet your invited guest at the door with a welcome kiss. Protocol number 1. Protocol number 2. After greeting them with a kiss, you as a host would then anoint each guest's head with oil, a smear of oil on their forehead. Now again, you and I go, what significance is that? Don't worry about it. There's some cultural and historical significance. We don't need to know all the details, but the idea is when a host did that and put oil on your head, just a little smear, it was a badge of honor. It was a way of the host saying, you are my honored guest tonight, and it will be my joy to serve you. And I recognize that you could be anywhere tonight, but you're with me, and I want to demonstrate that you honor me by being here, and I give you this historical blessing by putting some oil on your forehead. Understand, it's just a sign of honor where a guest says, let me serve you tonight. Thank you for coming. You're my honored guest. Protocol number 3, rule number 3. Somewhere after greeting your guest at the door with a welcome kiss, giving them a smear of oil on the forehead, each invited guest had their feet washed. Now, you guys know this, right? Because first century Middle Easterners basically wore sandals. If you walked any distance on dry, dusty roads, you're going to arrive at some place and have dusty, dirty feet, okay? So every invited guest had their feet washed. Now, this was more an issue of sanitation rather than ceremony. Because also, Middle Eastern guests, when they would eat, the tables were like this low, were like coffee table height. They'd put down a cushion, you lean on one elbow, feet extended from the table, but you're all kind of laying there. Your feet are not too far away from your other guest, right? And so, in order to allow your guest to have a pleasant dining experience, you needed your feet washed, right? So if you're the host, you actually made sure that each invited guest's feet were washed prior to dinner. Either you did it, more likely you had a servant do it. If you didn't have a servant do it or you didn't do it, at the very least, you would leave a basin of water and a towel near the door so that each guest then could take care of their own feet prior to dinner. Otherwise, dinner's going to be rather unappetizing, let's say. So those are the 3 protocols you need to know. There's actually one more. There's one more tradition that you need to know before we dive into this passage, is this. Uninvited guests could crash the party. The rule was, though, you can't mix it up with the invited guests. You have to stay along the back wall. You have to stay in the courtyard. You can't engage. You are allowed to observe. If you can stay in the shadows, if you can stay quiet, if you can come and not engage and just observe, you are welcome to check out what's going on. I remind you, this is before social media. This was a nod that the haves made to the have-nots. And the have-nots wanted, you know what they wanted to know? They wanted to know who's at the party, what's being talked about, who and what is going on, what's being served. It was a way where those who were on the outside wanted to look in and say, how do the rich and famous, how do the swells live? And so if you're an uninvited guest, you are actually welcome to observe as long as you don't interact, as long as you remain inconspicuous. Got it? So there we go. You greet your guests at the door. You smear them with oil as a sign of honor. You make sure their feet are washed, and you may have some uninvited guests who just kind of stay along the background and don't interact, and they just kind of stay in their place. Got it? So here we go. Now we're going to dive into the passage. Get this. I love this passage. I know we're in the middle of a parable series. Stories that Jesus told. What's cool about this passage is Luke records an actual dinner party. This is not a parable, but at the dinner party, Jesus, as one of the guests, tells a parable, a short little teaching story while he's at this dinner party. And we're going to investigate and see kind of what took place. Here we go. It's Luke chapter 7. I got the verses on the screen starting in verse 36. I'll read it. I'll kind of read a paragraph or so. We'll make some editorial comments, try to understand what's going on, and then move on. Here we go. I'll read. So when one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, so she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. As she stood behind Jesus at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, man, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. Let's stop here for a minute, recap the action, because Jesus has been invited to a dinner party at the house of a religious leader, a Pharisee, right? We will learn that rather than being an honored guest like the rest of the guests, this was a setup. This invitation to Jesus at this party, it was a setup. It was an interrogation. He is to be interrogated at this dinner party because these religious leaders, they did not like Jesus. You see, the religious elite had heard about him. They had heard that Jesus openly challenged the Pharisees and the practice of their traditions. They didn't like that. The religious elite had heard rumors that Jesus had healed people. They wanted to investigate. They had heard he had healed people, and on the Sabbath, no less, strictly forbidden by Jewish law. So that gave him a black mark in the religious leaders' eyes. And thirdly, they had heard rumors, of course, that this Jesus had actually healed people, and they said, no one can do that but God. They had heard that some said, no, he healed because he was a prophet. And the religious elite, they had heard about these prophets. They had seen many come and go. So Simon, our host, has invited this Jesus, this so-called prophet, to his house for dinner so he could uncover Jesus as a fraud. Simon, our host, he has already made his judgment concerning Jesus. We know this as we read the story, but we get a sneak peek. We know he's already made his judgment. Here's why. Because Jesus is the only invited guest who does not get greeted at the front door with a kiss, with a welcome kiss. Why? He's not welcome. He's the only invited guest who's here at this party who does not have a smear of oil on his forehead as a sign of honor. Why? Simon's making it very clear he is not to be honored. In fact, he's the guest of dishonor. It's very obvious both to Jesus and every guest what's with the guy with no oil. Jesus is also the only invited guest who has dirty feet at dinner. Wasn't greeted with the welcome kiss, not welcome. does not have the badge of honor because he's dishonored, and has the dirty feet, because no Pharisee is going to serve this would-be prophet. While guests are reclining at the dinner table, a woman with a reputation comes up, one who is known to have lived an immoral life comes up. She clearly disregards protocol, right? Leaves the shadows as an uninvited guest and clearly starts to interact with an invited guest. And she stands over Jesus' feet. And it says her weeping begins to wet his feet with her tears. Think about what's happening here, right? Everybody's watching this. She bends down, she undoes the tresses of her hair, which is exactly what immoral women do, as a sign of I'm available, takes her hair, and she starts to wipe his unwashed feet with her hair. This is a public disgrace. And Simon is offended. She continues this totally inappropriate display of affection by kissing Jesus' feet and pouring perfume on them. Simon, our host, he's thinking, oh, I've got the goods on this guy now. This is so obvious. This is like taking candy from a baby. Everyone can see. He can't be a prophet. He can't be a prophet. He thinks, this guy's no prophet. If he can't figure out who's touching him, if he allows this inappropriate display, he's no prophet. He's no man of God, that's for sure. Because no self-respecting rabbi would be seen in the vicinity of a woman like this, much less let her touch him and undo her hair and kiss his feet. So he's thinking, this guy is certainly no prophet if he can't figure out who's touching him. Now here's where the action takes a turn. Back to the text, verse 40. Jesus answered the host. He said, Simon, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. Now Jesus launches into this short parable. Jesus says, 2 people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii, equivalent of like $50,000, and the other 50 denarii, equivalent of $5,000. He says neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon's kind of taken aback. He's a smart guy, and he realizes that this is some kind of setup because the answer seems too obvious. So he kind of hedges his answer a bit. You can hear it. Simon replies, well, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. You've judged correctly, Jesus said. Good answer, Jesus says. Yeah, you got it. Now look what Jesus does next. At this point, the text says this. Then Jesus turned toward the woman and said to Simon. You catch that? It says Jesus turned toward the woman, but continues talking to Simon. Why did he do that? When you talk to someone, you face them and you speak directly to them. But it says Jesus turned to the woman, but continues to speak to Simon. Here's why. Because Jesus is now going to address the issue of the woman at his feet. He's going to be talking about this woman. And if he continues to look at Simon while he talks about the woman is no more than a prop for his story or an object lesson that the men are conversing about, right? She is someone who to be talked about, but not to be spoken to. Someone who is used, but really not valued. She's familiar with that posture. She's familiar with that position. Used, but not valued. Jesus will have none of it. So he turns to face the woman while he continues to talk to Simon. He makes eye contact with the woman. He addresses Simon, but he looks directly at the woman. He knows when he makes eye contact with this woman, When he looks at her and sees her, he affirms her value and worth. She's not a prop. She's not an object lesson. She's a woman who deserves dignity and respect from Jesus. She's not just the object of his parable, right? You're not someone to be talked about. You are someone to be spoken to. That's what Jesus is saying. He says, you have value and worth, and I see it because I see you. You been to a playground lately? Probably not. You don't look like playground people. But here's the deal. When you're a dad, one of your greatest joys is taking your young kids to a playground. Before I even put the car in park, my kids are bolting out the doors, and they're running to a jungle gym or the swings or something. Can't wait to get on some apparatus, some structure. And it's moments before I hear, "Hey, Dad, look at me. Look at me. Look how high I can swing. Look how fast I can go." And then my other child, not to be outdone, it's moments after that would say, no, Dad, look at me. Watch me. Look at me. Look what I'm doing. Look at me. If there's other kids on the playground, it's not long before I'm hearing, "Hey, mister, look at me. Look at me. Look how high I can go. Look how fast I can run. Look at my pretty dress. Look at my new shoes. Whatever. Look at me." You know why? Because every kid on a playground knows when you look at them, when you see them, it affirms they have value and worth, like they matter, like they're important, like you'll be proud of them, like they're there, like they're not just to be seen and not heard. It's like they're real. Every kid knows it. When you make eye contact with them and they can kind of show you something, they know if they get your attention, it affirms that they have value. It affirms you see them, that they're not invisible. Every kid on the playground knows it. Actually, every big kid in this room knows it. When someone looks at you, when someone sees you, it affirms you have value, you have worth, that you matter. Nothing changes. We all recognize that's a sign of value and worth, don't we? We all know it. In fact, when someone looks at you and affirms your value and worth, there is something inside you. You don't say it. You're too mature for that. You're too cool for that. But there is something that rises up in you because someone is affirming you just with a look. That's why that head nod is more important than you know. Because it's saying, I see you. You matter. I'll tell you what, there's nothing sadder than coming to a church service and feeling invisible. Like no one head nodded you. Like no one saw you. You came in, you went out, no connection, no eye contact. You leave feeling defeated, empty. Because we recognize when someone sees you, it matters. There is affirmation of value and worth. And I would tell you, as a sanctuary body, you make sure that no one leaves here without being seen, right? And I know it feels awkward. I know I spend most of my Sunday mornings out there head nodding and saying hello to people, right? If it's awkward and weird, it's not like I love doing that. It's just like I know what it feels like to walk in and not have someone recognize you, see you, affirm you, value you. And I kind of made a decision, not on my watch. And I'm just challenging you guys to do the same thing. You make sure, again, it feels weird. It feels awkward. You're going to think, well, they might misunderstand me. They might, probably not. They'll probably actually have something happen inside them because you just recognize them. You saw them. You noticed them. Do it. It changes the community, actually, if we all do it. All right, back to our story. Enough preaching. My kids would say, don't preach, Dad, right? You could have done that. Josh was about to do it. I saw him over there. Okay, back to our story, verse 44. Here we go. Remember, Jesus turned to the woman, but is continuing to speak to Simon. He's affirming this one and casually responding to this one. Verse 44. Then Jesus turned toward the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman, from the time I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, for she loved much. But whoever has been forgiven little loves little. I mean, just think, do you think there's power in those words for this woman? The one who broke protocol, came out of the shadows for this display of affection on Jesus, the one that she hopes or presents as the Savior. Do you think there's power in these words when Jesus speaks of her, affirms her in front of Simon and all these dinner guests, that Jesus commends her and holds her up as an example, as a model, because she's loved appropriately? She has shown love appropriately. Think about it. She has not been accused of showing love appropriately many times. Probably never felt that way about herself, I can tell you that, given her reputation. And Jesus affirms the very thing that she carries shame about. It's awesome, right? Probably never felt that way about herself. Never felt affirmed. No one has ever called her out and said, you really love appropriately. They might say other lewd things, but they never said it with the tenderness and the gentleness and the affirmation and the love that Jesus did. This is life-giving to this woman. You got to understand that. Jesus affirms her appropriate response of gratitude, right, and repentance for the sin that she recognizes she's forgiven. Think about it. She recognizes herself in this parable. She clearly identifies who she is in this parable as the bigger debtor. She gets it. She understands the great debt that she has been forgiven. And Simon is left there in silence. Doesn't say a word. He's speechless. He recognizes himself probably as the smaller debtor, the loveless one, the one who has not loved much, right? The one who is more concerned with comparing and judging the other guests, namely this woman, but others, rather than recognizing his desperate need for forgiveness. That he had a debt he too could not repay. Not as great as some others, but still out of his ability to pay for himself. His sin debt was not as big, not as grievous as others, not as this woman's for sure, but he still needed his debt forgiven by a gracious benefactor. You can miss that truth when you're too busy comparing yourself to others. When you're too busy judging if your sin debt is greater or lesser than the other person in the room, someone else. You can forget that when you're comparing and judging. You can forget that you desperately need forgiveness, that you need to repent so someone will show you grace and mercy, undeserved, so you can have your debt forgiven. Instead of being thankful and grateful, you continue to judge. You just harden up just a little bit more. See, the truth is, you and I are just as desperate as this woman and as Simon for a gracious Savior who will forgive our sin debt. It kind of doesn't matter the size of your debt. It really doesn't. It's too much for you to pay anyhow. What you need to recognize is, I'm in desperate need. I need a gracious benefactor, a gracious Savior to forgive me. And then in response, you're thankful, you're grateful, right? And you demonstrate it by loving much. That's what Jesus says, loving much. You know what that means? You love God and you love other people. You give them grace. You affirm them. You give them head nods. You look out for their best interest. That's how you love much. Jesus affirmed it in this woman. He wants to affirm it in us. It's just the first step is you and I recognizing our need and being thankful, grateful people to both him and demonstrating by loving other people. It's the way we demonstrate we know the Savior who's forgiven our sin debt. And we can do it. We can do it. I'm going to invite the band back up here. We're going to close with a worship song, but I think it's just a great time for a couple of us. If you already know Jesus, right? if you've been forgiven of your sin debt, that's awesome. But tonight would be a great time to reaffirm you recognize that like you need his mercy and grace, right? That you've received his forgiveness and you just need a fresh wash. Because maybe you've compared or judged and not, you've forgotten that you were forgiven a debt that you couldn't repay. It would be great. If you're a believer already, it would be a great night just to remind yourself and just to allow his grace to kind of wash over you afresh, and you can be thankful, grateful debtors who know that you got this undeserved mercy from a great Savior. If you're not a believer yet, if you don't know Jesus yet, you're sitting with a boatload of sin and it hasn't been taken care of yet, well, tonight's your night. Tonight's your night, because the truth is you have a Savior who says all you need to do is confess, saying, I got a debt I can't repay, and I need someone gracious enough to forgive me, even though I don't deserve it, but I want to receive it and accept that forgiveness of my debt so I can not be separated from God anymore. If that's the case, I want you to pray something. In fact, I'm going to ask you all to bow your heads. Just, again, if you're a believer, whisper a prayer of gratitude. If you're not a believer yet, you can pray something as simple as this, like, Jesus, man, I identify with myself. I identify myself in the story too. Man, like that woman, I get it. I've got this big sin debt that needs forgiveness because I'll never be able to repay it. I'm a sinner in need of a Savior. My debt is more than I can pay. And Jesus, I recognize that your sacrifice on the cross, what you did, actually was the payment I needed to cover my sin. It erases my debt. So I want to take what you did on the cross and apply it to my debt as payment for my sin. I gratefully choose to make that exchange and then follow you with gratitude and thankfulness, because you are a great Savior who paid for me what I could not repay myself. I thank you for that. And I give myself to you now. And I pray this in your powerful name, Jesus.